Welcome, dear listeners, and welcome to the War of 1812 channel Book of the Month. This month, July 2022, our book is The War of 1812, Conflict for a Continent by J.C.A. Stagg, a.k.a. John Stagg. Conflict for a Continent is an American book which focuses on the political and diplomatic aspects of the war more than on battlefield action. It was published by the Cambridge University Press and is part of the series Cambridge Essential Histories. So, who was J.C.A. Stagg? John Stagg. Well, we couldn't do better than to read from the book itself. Excuse me while I get my reading glasses here. It's kind of hard to see in the dark. Okay, here we go from the book. J.C.A. Stagg is professor of history at the University of Virginia. He is the author of 2 books on James Madison, as well as many articles on the political, military, and diplomatic history of the early American Republic. He has edited or co-edited 17 volumes of the papers of James Madison. He currently serves on the editorial board of the War of 1812 magazine and the board of the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation. In his introduction, Stagg admits that he has not, quote, devoted his life to the study of the War of 1812, end of quote. Still, as an expert on James Madison and his administration, Stagg kinda did spend a lifetime studying the war, and this book provides a detailed examination of the political machinations and intrigues that undermined the Americans throughout the conflict. Stagg believed the U.S. declaration of war on Great Britain and subsequent invasion of Canada, quote, was to compel Great Britain to sign a treaty that would guarantee, as a matter of international law, future respect for American rights and interests. In that sense, the War of 1812 was fought not so much for free trade or sailors' rights or for territory or empire, as many historians have supposed, but more for a scrap of paper that, by the end of 1814, had failed to materialize. End of quote. Stagg concludes his introduction by writing that his book, quote, is an explanation of why the U.S. never got the treaty it wanted, end of quote. Stagg's introduction is also interesting as it presents a detailed review of the literature about the war, ranging from its immediate aftermath up to his time of writing, which was in 2012. Amusingly, he notes, quote, the war was celebrated not merely in books, but also in stage plays and poems, now mercifully forgotten, end of quote. In his first chapter, War, Stagg explores the various issues which led to conflict between the U.S. and Great Britain, as well as between the U.S. and Napoleonic France. In his war message to Congress on June 1, 1812, Madison listed the following grievances. 1. The British practice of boarding American vessels, the U.S. being a neutral during the Napoleonic Wars, and their impressing American seamen for service in the British Navy. 2. The Royal Navy's practice of violating American territorial waters. 3. The British blockade system. They were ostensibly blockading French ports, but they were seizing and confiscating American shipping anywhere on the high seas. 4. Madison's belief that American overtures to resolve these issues had been ignored and rebuffed by the British. He also said he had uncovered evidence of an English secret agent who had been employed since 1809 in attempts to subvert the U.S. government. And finally, that British agents operating from Canada were fermenting hostilities between Native American tribes and white settlers. On June the 4th, Congress voted 79 to 49 in favor of war. The vote received the support of most Democrat Republicans, which was President James Madison's party, and was opposed by all the members of the opposition Federalist Party, plus some disaffected Democrat Republicans. Taking its time, the Senate commenced debate on the Declaration on June the 9th and considered such options as postponing hostilities, fighting a strictly naval war, and declaring war on both France and Britain. In the end, they rejected all these ideas and on June the 17th voted in favor of the Declaration by the narrower margin of 19 to 13. Opposition came largely from the Federalist Party, abetted by a few disaffected Democrat Republicans. Stagg concludes his chapter on the run-up to war by noting that on June the 19th, President Madison appeared at both the Navy and War Departments in order to offer encouragement to the staff whilst he was wearing, quote, a little round hat with a huge cockade, end of quote. Did President Madison declare war in order to wear a fancy hat? Fancy that. Madison was a legal scholar, but an unlikely military leader. At age 61, standing just 5'4" and weighing a little more than 100 pounds, Madison would hardly have presented a warlike figure. Stagg then proceeds to review the course of the war year by year from 1812 to 1814. I'm not going to review his conclusions in detail, but I would like to draw your attention to a number of comments I found especially intriguing. Perhaps the most compelling part of this section of the book is Stagg's detailed, as befits an expert on Madison's presidency, Stagg's detailed explication of the incompetence, intrigues, and political infighting that derailed American attempts at a coherent war strategy. In some ways, the war may be seen as a war between the Democrat-Republicans and the Federalists, rather than as a war between the United States and Great Britain. And in that case, there was a clear winner, the Democrat-Republicans, because their opposition to the war finished the Federalist Party as a political entity. Here are some of the interesting tidbits to be found in the book. From page 55, regarding the extremely inept appointment of American officers. Quote, from one correspondent, the President learned that Robert Leroy Livingston of New York, a Federalist congressman also known as Crazy Bob, would make a most excellent lieutenant colonel if throwing decanters and glasses were to be the weapons used in the war. End of quote. From page 61, that William Hull had had a stroke a year before the war, which might possibly explain his actions and behavior at Detroit. From page 71, that Solomon Van Rensselaer, cousin and chief staff officer of Stephen Van Rensselaer, American commander at the Battle of Queenston Heights, had a, quote, extremely abrasive manner, which may go some ways in explaining what happened during that American defeat. From page 73, that Major General Henry Dearborn hung around New England instead of taking command at the front, as he believed his, quote, task was not so much to facilitate the invasion of Canada as to secure their states, i.e., the New England states, from British incursions and Federalist treason. End of quote. As well, this section of the book, specifically the chapters covering 1813 and 1814, also provide an account of the Creek/Red Sticks War and Andrew Jackson's role in it, information not generally found in books focusing on the war in Canada. The last chapter is simply entitled Peace, and it's worth the price of admission alone. Stagg notes that the sense of relief most Americans felt over the war ending without the United States losing territory quickly turned into a conviction that America had actually won the war. As for the Canadians, quote, the war can be regarded as a victory inasmuch as they survived a serious threat to their existence as members of the Empire, albeit with considerable assistance from British regular troops and the Royal Navy. Without that survival, there could have been no Canadian Confederation of the sort that was formed in 1867, and the successes of the war in repulsing the American invader provided many mythical stories that contributed to the formation of a Canadian national identity, at least for the English-speaking, if not necessarily for the Francophone population. End of quote. In this chapter, Stagg also addresses the question of why the American military performed so poorly, or, as John Quincy Adams put it, why the American effort was such, quote, a burlesque upon war, end of quote. Stagg notes the well-documented causes of American failure, but also points out that while the British were able to successfully rebuff the invading Americans, they also suffered offensive failures at Plattsburgh, at Baltimore, and most spectacularly at New Orleans. This is something I've thought. The Americans did poorly on offense, but much better on defense. I suppose it is a truism that warfare favors the defense. Or, to put it another way, it's easier to defend than to attack. In any event, Stagg articulated what I've been thinking, which proves great minds think alike. Well, okay, one great mind and one average one, namely my mind, Warren's mind. The book then concludes with an extensive list of sources, citing American, British, and Canadian works, both popular and academic. My rating? 4.25 out of 5. While this work may be a little on the dry side, it does an excellent job of relating the events of the war to what was going on in American politics and within Madison's government during the war. Historically, the War of 1812 is said to have been even more unpopular in the United States than the Vietnam War, and both conflicts appear to have shared a chaotic political scene. Have a suggestion for a War of 1812 book for us to read and discuss? Then please share it in the comments below. Our next book, our August book, will be The Astonishing General, The Life and Legacy of Sir Isaac Brock by Wesley B. Turner. Please drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and please consider subscribing to our channel, where we chronicle and discuss the events of the War of 1812 month by month. My current goal is 100 subscribers. Won't you help me achieve it? Why not subscribe today? When the barrage lifts, Warren. P.S. A buddy has chastised me for not explaining the images that you see in the videos. So the picture you've been looking at today is a statue of James Madison with Dolly, which is to be found at his estate, Montpelier in Virginia. And the picture is courtesy of Pixhere. That's Pxhere. While the atmospheric music is Oppressive Gloom by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. Cheers!